North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. What do? We report the news honestly and fairly. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out both. We make commentary, which is not news. That's opinion, and opinion only. Your opinion, my opinion, and so we debate. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. This is the Wells Report. Thanks very much for joining us. A very big day for a former president. The first president, in fact, to ever be indicted by the Department of Justice. And let me tell you something. There are a lot of worries. There are an awful lot of people. There are a lot of opining. There's a lot of opining going on, et cetera, et cetera. But this is the first step in a very long road, which may or may not lead to difficulties for the former president. Donald Trump, according to USA Today, prepared for his initial court appearance today as the first former president to be criminally indicted by flying from New Jersey to Florida, continuing to fundraise off accusations and blasting the rival Biden administration for what he calls a political prosecution. Let me ask you this question. Do you believe it is indeed a political prosecution? Yes or no, and why? 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172, or you can join us on the chat this morning. Is this a political prosecution, or is this a genuine crime in your mind so far? We don't know anything about it, but, once again, speculation reigns among the talking heads, and I guess you and I can both fit ourselves into that role today. Trump's hearing is set for 3 p.m. at the federal courthouse in Miami. That's Eastern time. That'll be 2 p.m. here in the Central Time Zone. Trump has promoted the event like a grand opening, telling supporters he would see them in Miami. Security experts do not expect violence because of the more than 1,000 arrests after the Capitol attack, January 6th, 2021. I'm struck by that wording. That's USA Today. USA Today is talking about the Capitol attack. It went from being an incursion, an insurrection, to a riot, and now it's an attack. It's interesting. Words matter, and that's one of those things about fact and bias. I'm just pointing that out from a journalistic standpoint. Trump is expected to plead not guilty at the routine court proceeding, similar to his New York arraignment in April. For that trip, news cameras aboard helicopters tracked his motorcade across town and monitored his flights from the tarmac to the takeoff. The hearing itself could offer revelations. Trump's lawyers will be new. He swapped lawyers after the indictment was unsealed on Friday. These are the updates from USA Today, right up to the minute. Trump flew from one of his resorts to another Monday, that was yesterday, to prepare for the hearing. He left to Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster, New Jersey, to fly from Newark to Miami before staying at Trump National Doral. The reason he stayed at Doral instead of Mar-a-Lago is it's about a half-hour drive from the federal courthouse, considerably shorter than the drive from Mar-a-Lago. Trump is charged with allegedly stashing more than 300 classified documents after leaving the White House in January of 2021. He's accused of not just storing and hiding the documents, but showing them to guests at Bedminster. This, according to the 44-page indictment unsealed Friday. And this is where we get to know the difference between, say, for example, a court proceeding and an indictment or a grand jury. Okay, so what they have is they have somebody testifying that Donald Trump showed this document to people who did not have security clearances after he said that this was not declassified. So, what was the document? No one knows. No one knows. And this is a very, very loose analogy here. It's sort of like saying in a murder case, he was shot with a .38 special revolver without actually having the weapon. So you don't get to postulate that in court. That's the difference between a grand jury and a court proceeding. They don't know what the document was. Therefore, it's moot. Therefore, there is no evidence there. Now, this is not me trying to sway anybody with opinion. These are just legal facts that I think you need to know about this case. This strikes to a couple of different things. First of all, it's one thing to get a grand jury indictment. It's another thing to prove it in court. It's quite another thing to prove it in court. And you can't prove it if there's no evidence. You can throw it out there. The defense attorneys will say objection. And before the defense attorneys have a chance to explain their objection, the judge will say sustained. And then probably an admonishment to the jury to disregard the statement. That's the difference between court and an indictment, just so you know. So Trump said one document described a plan of attack. Another had a map of a military installation, according to the indictment. Once again, they just don't have these pieces of information. He allegedly acknowledged knowing the documents were classified, saying this is still a secret, and then asked his guests not to talk about it, according to various reporting. Trump wielded the charges in his fundraising for the 2024 presidential campaign he's engaged in almost immediately after announcing the indictment. In social media posts, he repeated familiar lines about the investigation being another witch hunt. Is it? 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. By the way, on the chat, Isaac says, if multiple persons testify they saw the guy shoot the other person, that is admitted in court and used as evidence. Well, that's a different subject. In the analogy, the police officer says he was shot with a .38 special, but they don't have the weapon. Okay, so what was he shot with? It may be a .38 caliber weapon of some kind, or a 9mm or what have you, because they're the same size bullets, basically. But you can't say that it was a .38 special if you don't have the weapon. That's why murder weapons are so important. They don't have the actual piece of evidence. All they have is hearsay evidence as to what the president said about it. That's hearsay. That's also not admitted in court. The difference between a court proceeding and a court proceeding and an honest trial. Let's see. He described the search of Mar-a-Lago, it was actually a raid, staged to look like a made-for-TV crime scene with police sirens flashing red and blue lights. The pleas echoed his appeals after his March indictment in New York State on 34 felony charges of falsifying business records to pay hush money to women who claimed to have had sex with him. Trump pleaded not guilty in April, awaits a trial in March of 2024. His campaign boasted that Trump raised more than $4 million in the first 24 hours after his New York indictment became public. Yeah, Nancy Mace, who is a representative in the House of Representatives, said that this entire proceeding has handed the 2024 Republican presidential nomination to President Trump, and perhaps will be a coast into his second term as president of the United States on his third try. Do you believe that's true? 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. So the president is profiting on this from a standpoint of campaign cash. Then there is something that drives me a little bit batty about the way we handle news in these United States. It has to do with essentially a journalistic device that started a while back, and that is the president is not going to appear before federal judge Eileen Cannon today. He's going to appear in front of a magistrate. Now, people keep saying a magistrate judge. Really? It's like saying a beef steak, a magistrate judge. It's redundant. Not that a magistrate is a judge. He is not. He is an administrator of law. A judge is an arbiter of it. There's a difference. But they keep saying a magistrate judge. And the Miami Herald, Jay Weaver writing this, starts with that very term. A magistrate judge will be presiding over the momentous Miami federal court hearing today, when former President Donald Trump makes his first appearance on charges of keeping classified documents at his Palm Beach estate and obstructing government efforts to reclaim them. Magistrate Judge, there it is again, Jonathan Goodman, not U.S. District Judge Eileen Cannon, who was randomly assigned to Trump's case, will be handling the former president's arraignment and bond matters. Cannon, who had been widely reported to be handling those duties, will still remain on the historic case as lead judge. Goodman is a well-regarded veteran magistrate who once worked as a newspaper reporter in South Florida, later obtained his law degree, practiced civil litigation, including as a partner with the Ackerman law firm in Miami. This is actually a very, very good choice. Not that these things are anything but random, because they are indeed random. Because this guy has civil law in his background. It's civil law. And so the Presidential Record Act is civil law. So this is right in his wheelhouse. Cannon is the newest member of the federal bench in South Florida, joining the court system as a judge days after Trump lost in November of 2020. Cannon, who was nominated by Trump, previously served in the U.S. Attorney's Office as a prosecutor, drew widespread criticism for her handling of the former president's civil case, challenging the FBI's seizure of classified documents from his Mar-a-Lago estate last summer. By the way, that's kind of misleading here. That's misleading. Her handling, her widespread criticism was a respect of executive privilege, not from a standpoint of just signing off on executive privilege, but from a standpoint of saying, hey, he's got executive privilege, which he did at the time, and we need to have a special master look at those documents to see which of these can be admissible and which of these cannot be admissible in the civil case. That is not a basis of criticism for Aileen Cannon. That criticism that we keep hearing about, that criticism is simply, it's just simply bias journalism. That's all it is. Miami attorney Joseph DeMaria, who once worked at the Justice Department's Organized Crime Task Force in South Florida, told the Miami Herald last week there may be no legal reason to disqualify Cannon from staying on the Trump case. But he said that the American public is so divided politically, if she chooses to stick with it, many people may not have faith in the outcome. See, this is one of those things that, you don't solve a problem until you have it. You don't solve a problem until you have it. And oh, by the way, Aileen Cannon is not going to make the decision in this case unless the defense goes for summary judgment. If they go for summary judgment where the judge hears the case and makes a decision, then there might be a basis for that statement. But the entire judicial system in the United States is based around the jury. The jury makes the decision. The judge arbitrates the decision and passes sentence. And to say, well, if Aileen Cannon is in the case, people might doubt the outcome. Excuse me? I mean, there are two things there. One, this guy doesn't expect to win this case. He doesn't think that the president's going to lose this case. That's thing number one. He's already predicting that people will be upset with the outcome. It doesn't make any difference what the outcome is. At least half the country is going to be dissatisfied with it. That's where we find ourselves today. As the president of the United States, the former president of the United States, finds himself in a federal courtroom. First time it's ever happened. This is the Wells Report. We'll be back with more in just a moment. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will be back in 4 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 3 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. This is John David Wells talking in a closed microphone. This is the Wells Report. Thanks very much for joining us today. News, analysis, commentary, debate. More about that coming up in just a couple of moments. So there are many pieces to this puzzle. We went through a lot of them yesterday. And as I was, it's like looking at a crossword, a jigsaw puzzle on your table. All the pieces and trying to first identify the pieces, explain what they are and how they fit together. And I was talking to the executive producer of this broadcast, Dirk Steele, and I said, was that way too much information in way too small a space, or could you understand what I was saying? He said he could understand it. I hope you could too. And one of these little pieces of this jigsaw puzzle includes somebody totally outside the case, somebody completely pursuing a different course of action. And that is Biden special counsel Robert Hur. Hur is investigating President Biden's handling of classified documents, this being reported by Fox News. The indictment of former President Donald Trump in special counsel Jack Smith's investigation is casting renewed attention onto another similar probe. Special counsel Robert Hur's investigation of President Biden's handling of classified documents. Trump is going to be arraigned today, as we have reported, after a federal grand jury indicted him on 37 charges, each related to his retention of sensitive documents. Trump's indictment has led to calls for Hur to bring similar charges against Biden. Now, the good news about this is Robert Hur is not going to listen to any of this stuff. Oh, okay, so I just realized I forgot to do something very important. But I want to tell you that what I've done here is I've left the slide up a little bit too long to try to enhance the aesthetic properties of the Wells Report. See? When I put myself on there, you go, huh? So Robert Hur is not going to listen to this din in the background. Robert Hur is not going to do that. He doesn't care what's happening with Donald Trump's indictment. He is not going to base his actions on the actions of Jack Smith. He's simply not. What he's going to do is he's going to do his work methodically and professionally. Now, you may not agree with the product of that work, but he's going to do that work to the best of his ability, I'm sure. Now, will he let his politics poison his professionalism? I don't know. I don't know. We won't know until we see the product of his work. But I got to tell you, and we're going to be talking about this in the next hour of the Wells Report. There was a floor speech in the United States Senate by Chuck Grassley that dropped a bomb that is really serious. It's very serious. Now, Robert Hur, and we'll have that for you coming up next hour. And I'm sure that the information in that speech, which we will play for you in its entirety, I'm pretty sure that he already had that information. What is he going to do with it? We do not know. But I've got to tell you something. Robert Hur, from all that I've heard, is someone that is going to be very, very close to a professional federal prosecutor. And that's what we need. We need to return to blind justice, the rule of law, truthful interaction with the public. And we don't have that right now. Is Robert Hur going to add to that mistrust, or is he going to work on this decades-long road to try to rehabilitate the entire idea of justice in America? This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Thanks very much for joining us on this Tuesday. We'll be back with more coming up in just a couple of moments as we bring you the news, issues of the day, truth and solutions. This is the Wells Report. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will be back in 4 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 3 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. This is the Wells Report. Greetings. My name is John David Wells. So Donald Trump at 3 p.m. Eastern Time will appear in a federal courtroom in Miami. And what will he do? He will be arraigned on 37 counts of federal charges of one kind or another, 37 counts of breach of federal law. And a lot of people are worried about a lot of things. And a lot of the things that they're worried about have to do with what we, the people, will do in Miami surrounding that courthouse. They're very concerned about violence. USA Today has an article about it, but this is a bias alert. This is a Wells Report bias alert. This is a biased, even almost scurrilous recounting of what they're concerned about. But I'll give it to you. Just remember that the grains of salt that are necessary when consuming American journalism are boulder-sized, if not mountain-sized. So here's how the article starts. And by the way, this is not an opinion piece, okay? Will Carlos is writing this as theoretical journalism. Well, you know, you can't put opinion into your news. We don't do it here. Why do they do it on the pages of USA Today? Anytime Donald Trump's rhetoric and his most extremist supporters overlap, there's a possibility of chaos. Trump, after all, held a Washington rally on January 6th where he repeated false claims about election fraud and encouraged his supporters to walk down to the Capitol and show strength, which many of them promptly did, raiding the Capitol in an insurrection that turned deadly. Really? Now, I differentiate between deadly, no one was killed in that insurrection or riot or attack or whatever you want to call it, whatever the term of art is for it now. No one was killed in that. Now, there were police officers that were bloodied and assaulted, and that is inexcusable. But the deaths that everybody ascribes to this deadly attack, well, the only person that died in that deadly attack was Ashley Babbitt, shot in the face by a federal officer. It's horrifying. But let's get back to this. Later, when the Justice Department pursued the investigation of Trump and the FBI raided his Mar-a-Lago home for classified documents that are now the core of federal charges against him, President Trump called the effort a hoax. When he faced an earlier indictment in New York, he called on supporters to protest, protest, protest. In both cases, widespread protests were scant. But after the initial raid, individual extremists posted plans on social media to attack the FBI. One died in a shootout with police after attempting to follow through on those threats. Now, the former president is set to surrender himself to federal authorities in Miami on Tuesday on new charges that he mishandled classified documents. This is a Wells Report BS alert. Okay? He's not surrendering himself. He is appearing in response to a summons. He's not surrendering himself. When you've been convicted of something and you have been sentenced and you're released on your own recognizance until that sentence begins, when the sentence begins, you surrender yourself. This is the bias that I'm talking to you about. When I say that we identify fact and bias, here it is. This is not an opinion piece, or at least it's not called an opinion piece. This is supposed to be straight journalism. It's nowhere close. What is this guy doing? Look, when I report news, I report news. I don't make comments on it except for bias, like this one. When I report the news, I simply report the news. When I have something to say about it as an opinion, you know it. And that's the way journalism needs to be across the board. It just simply must. And that it isn't, it's like, it grates on my nerves because we the people of the United States deserve better than this. We deserve facts. We deserve truth. We don't need a reporter saying, well, he lied about this and he lied about that. And then he said, protest, protest, protest. And my God, the potential for violence. I will have to note that there was no violence at the New York protests. There just wasn't. I don't know what was on my hand, but it feels like it was hydrochloric acid. Sorry, I had to take a break there. For those people watching, I was just, my eyes are just screaming at me right now. It could be allergies. Thank you very much for snorting into the microphone, John David. Oh, certainly. Don't worry about it. So, the former president is set to surrender himself in this ridiculous copy. The moment will be historic. No American president has faced federal charges. There, a fact. Singular fact. We point those out too, fact and bias. The moment will be historic. No American president has faced federal charges. Despite the occasion, the consensus as of yesterday was that widespread protests, civil disobedience are unlikely, but security experts remain worried about individual people or small cells of extremists, or simply the possibility of an armed dust-up among passionate demonstrators. Like the victory celebration in Denver. Dirk Steele, our executive producer, lives in Denver. I had to say it. Sorry, dude. What are the chances of violence as Trump is indicted? Online, in pro-Trump forums, and on far-right social media, a few voices have called for protests, violence, and even civil war. Okay, there you go. My goodness gracious, if you want to hear rhetoric like that, all you got to do is play back some old Maxine Waters video. Good heavens. But experts who monitor extremism, again, are not predicting wide-scale protests and violence for a variety of reasons, although the threat of small-scale or individual terror attacks remain a possibility. Good heavens! Oh, man. Golly, I am so sorry about this. But for crying out loud, I do not know what I got in my eye, but it's awful. Good heavens. All I did was have coffee this morning. Wow. So at the end of this segment, I'll go and wash my eye out so I don't have a bonfire in it. So are experts predicting large violent protests in Miami? No, they're not. We've not encountered online chatter that leads us to believe that violence is inevitable at protests tomorrow, said Jared Holt, who's a senior researcher at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. Holt estimates that a couple of hundred people will show up in protest, but he has seen no indications of a big swell of folks. Let me talk to you about this. Henceforth and forever. Henceforth and forever. When there are political protests, now I'm not talking about leftist political protests, right? I'm not talking about leftist political protests. I'm talking about right-wing or Republican political protests. As we have seen with January 6th, vis-a-vis the BLM riots, as we've seen the difference in the way federal law enforcement handled those events, conservative protesters have to follow a different set of rules. Do not resort to violence. Do not burn down a Wendy's. Do not sack a Target store. Do not beat women with 2x4s. Do not kick people to death in the streets. Do not do any of those things. Show up in numbers. Huge numbers if possible, but huge peaceful numbers. Bring your Constitution. Bring your American flag. Bring your voice. If someone in the crowd says, let's break into the courthouse, find the nearest police officer, point the guy out, and have him arrested forthwith. Because if you don't, then that guy who said, let's break into the courtroom and let's create a giant mess, that's going to become the face of your movement. That is going to become the exact reality that everyone will remember and that the mainstream media will actually report. If, however, you're standing there with an American flag and your Constitution in the other hand, and you're singing the national anthem, what are they going to report? Peaceful protests. Now, what about the other side of the question? I mean, what should these protesters do in Miami? What do you think they ought to do? I mean, if peaceful protest is held up against the BLM riots, which happened on national television with a Wendy's burning in the background, should these protesters burn down the nearest Wendy's and go and loot Target? I mean, after all, that was a peaceful protest, right? Is that what they should do? The answer, of course, is no. What they should do is what I just said. Don't show up with a couple of hundred of your closest friends. Show up with 20,000 or 30,000 of your closest friends. Everybody bring a copy of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Everybody bring an American flag. Surround the courthouse. Report people who want to do violence to the nearest police officer. Stay away from police barriers. Don't get within 10 feet of a police barrier. If they tell you to disperse, go away. Follow the law. Because once again, if you don't do this, then your story will be warped and twisted into just exactly what the January 6th, whatever you want to call it, I'll just call it a riot because that's what I think it was. It actually wasn't. But it's greater than a trespass, isn't it? Okay, criminal trespassing, all right. The criminal trespass of the Capitol building. That's the wrong line, so I'm going to answer it, and then I'm going to hang up. There you go. Anyway, the criminal trespass of the Capitol building. So what we're going to do here is we're going to see this country have to face the reality of people who who will protest something that they think is egregiously wrong without burning something down, without killing someone in the street, without beating a woman with a 2x4, without firing fireworks at police officers, or shooting lasers into their eyes, or locking up a police station, then setting it on fire. Trying to kill the people inside, trying to incinerate them, in fact. These are the things that we have to deal with. Is it a double standard? Of course it's a double standard. Of course it was a double standard. And it remains so to this day. But these are the constraints. The constraints are good sense. The constraints are patriotism. The constraints are constitutional protection of redress of your grievances. If indeed you believe this is unjust, by all means make your voices heard. In numbers, legally, with respect for law and country. And oh, by the way, your fellow Americans, even if they disagree with you. One of the greatest quotes of our founding framers of this nation was from Samuel Adams. When he found himself in an intractable conversation with somebody over politics, what he would say is, "We disagree. Now leave us in peace." There has to be a time for you to say that. You have to remain calm. You have to recognize agitators for saboteurs within your group, and you need to ostracize them immediately. Immediately. That's what you need to do. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. What are your thoughts? 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Give us a call. By the way, that other call was on the other line. That is the line where I get telemarketing calls. And so I just hang up. That's just the way to do it. But 817-379-2172 is the other line. So by all means, join us. This is the Wells Report for Tuesday. This is the 13th day of June, year of our Lord, 2023. Donald Trump is going to appear in a federal courtroom. The first president of any kind to face federal charges. Is this a political prosecution? Is this a criminal prosecution of a criminal? Is this what may be a dangerous day in Miami? This is the Wells Report. Back with more coming up in just a couple of moments. Thanks very much for joining us today. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to The Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Telephone number 817-379-2172. Chat room is flying today. By all means, join us. It's not just various pundits disguised as journalists in USA Today that are concerned about whether or not there's going to be violence in Miami today. Donald Trump's advisors have confided that they are worried that a rally slated to take place outside the Miami courthouse during the former president's arraignment today could explode into violence and be a disaster. It cannot be. It simply cannot be. Inside of this event, there's going to be a disaster, a Trump aide anonymously told the Daily Beast. There are going to be people that come out that don't want to be peaceful. If indeed you are standing next to somebody, if you're listening to this broadcast before you head over to the courthouse later this afternoon, if you happen to be listening to this broadcast in Miami, once again, if you find people that come out that don't want to be peaceful, find a cop. Say, hey, this guy wants to throw a Molotov cocktail through the window. He just said he wanted to do that. You can't do otherwise. Whether the guy throws the Molotov cocktail through the window or not means nothing. All he has to do is say it. And that leads the national news from one end of the country to the other. And you know it. Or at least you ought to know it. The same confident added, by the way, you get fanatics coming out. Yeah, you do get fanatics coming out. But the interesting thing about this is, there is absolutely no excuse for violence in any kind of political protest. There isn't. There simply isn't. In fact, Martin Luther King's protests of the late 50s and 60s exposed the state's bigotry because they didn't do anything non-peaceful. That's the way the people who support Donald Trump have to behave. If there's any violence, it has to be somebody from without, not somebody from within. If someone within wants to create violence, report them to a police officer instantly. The demonstration, take two. The demonstration outside the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Florida is being put together by longtime Trump ally Roger Stone and referred to as a far-right activist Laura Loomer. Now, this is from the New York Post, not necessarily a biased news source, but that's a little edgy. A veteran advisor to the ex-commander-in-chief has expressed misgivings about the involvement of those two controversial figures in the rally. Who are they talking to? Who are these people that they're talking to? And by the way, when it comes to Roger Stone and Laura Loomer, are they protesting the right thing or the wrong thing? A lot of people will say, no, they're protesting the wrong thing. But goodness gracious, if you think about the protests that we've seen splattered across the American media and across the American landscape for all these years, is this so different? Except, of course, that, at least in my mind, this protest is about the rule of law and what may be a corrupt legal process in the United States. This is about political prosecution. in my humble opinion. See, I did it again. And most Americans believe the same thing. Pew Research bore that out a couple of days ago. Look, there has to be one set of rules. My mom used to say, I don't care what the rules are as long as everybody plays by the same rules. Well, I care about what the rules are. The rules are the Constitution, Bill of Rights, the U.S. Code. Play by those rules. And I think for the most part, most Americans do. The problem we have right now is the federal government doesn't play by those rules. They find ways to circumvent them. They find ways to render the Republican form of government whereby the legislature makes law, the executive branch enforces it, the judicial branch arbitrates it or explains it. All that's going away. And it all starts with the executive branch ignoring the law passed by the legislature. And then we go downstream to a federal judiciary, which is political. And what we're going to have to do there is we're going to have to, if they want to be politicians, fine, they can run for office just like everybody else. Federal district judges, 6-year term. Circuit Court of Appeals judges, 10-year term. Supreme Court justices, 12-year term. All done every 4 years in the national elections. That's what must happen. That's what's got to be the case. Everybody's got to play by the same rules, and that is not where we live right now. Or maybe you disagree. 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. My name is John David Wells. This is the Wells Report. Coming up next hour, Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley took to the floor of the United States Senate and dropped a bomb. Dropped a bomb. You're going to hear it for yourself. That's what the next segment starts with here on the Wells Report. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about what this nation finds itself, the predicament it finds itself in as we head to the 2024 election. And oh, by the way, there's been an Eric Holder sighting. Oh my, what did he have to say? Well, you simply will not believe it. This is the Wells Report. All right, back with more in just a couple of minutes. Thanks again for being with us. We'll see you in a few. Thanks for listening to the Wells Report, more of which continues in 6 minutes. You found the Wells Report, more of which continues in 5 minutes. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will be back in 4 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 3 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds. North to south, coast to coast, around the world, this is the Wells Report. What do we do here? We report the news, honestly and fairly. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out both. We make commentary, but that's opinion, both yours and mine. That is not news. That's just opinion. And we get to share those in these United States because of something called the First Amendment. And then there's debate. News, analysis, commentary, and debate is what you find on the Wells Report. This was explosive And I got to be perfectly honest with you. This was frightening. The reason it's frightening is because it exposes a United States president, at least at some level, to high crimes and misdemeanors. It happened on the floor of the United States Senate. It happened with a guy named Chuck Grassley. He's from Iowa. You've seen excerpts of this speech, perhaps, but we're going to give you the whole thing, and we're going to do that right this very moment. From the well of the Senate, Chuck Grassley of Iowa, yesterday.
Came here to speak to my colleagues about the Biden administration and the FBI playing games with the American people by hiding the FBI-generated 1023 document from Congress and the American people. Director Wray was going to be held in contempt for refusing to produce the 1023 that I told Chairman Comer about. And I think I had that first conversation with Chairman Comer about 3 weeks ago. Then, instead of contempt, the FBI committed to showing the 1023 and related documents to the whole Congress. By the way, I thank Chairman Comer for his cooperation with me and how he's pursued this issue, because we know a heck of a lot more now than if he hadn't been involved in this whole effort. So the FBI showed, after the FBI committed to showing this document, they showed, but it didn't provide possession of the 1023 to the House Oversight Committee last week. And by the way, 1023 is unclassified. So why shouldn't the entire country know about what's in this 1023? As the public knows, that 1023 involves an alleged bribery scheme between then Vice President Biden, Hunter Biden, and a foreign national. The same allegations that Chairman Comer and I made public on May the 3rd of this year. And on the very same day that the FBI provided a redacted version of the 1023 to the House Oversight Committee, the Justice Department then announced that former President Trump had been indicted and charged with 37 crimes related to his alleged mishandling of classified records. Attorney General Garland signed off on prosecuting Trump for conduct similar to what Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton engaged in. Two standards of justice in this country will turn our constitutional republic upside down. Thanks to the political infections within the Biden Justice Department and the FBI, we were well along the road for that to happen. This senator will do all that he can to fight political infection in the Department of Justice and the FBI. And you fight it then by bringing transparency to what this government does. The public's business ought to be public. Transparency brings accountability. With respect to the 1023 shown to that House Oversight Committee, from what I've been told by folks who've reviewed it, it's filled with redactions. Now, the document that Comer and I read had maybe 2 or 3 half-inch redactions, not whole sentences redacted, as I'm told the document in the SCIF is. So, Director Wray placed redactions on a document that's already unclassified. As I've said before, unclassified. More than that, the FBI made Congress review a redacted, unclassified document in a classified facility. That goes to show you the disrespect that the FBI has for Congress. On a previous time on the Senate floor, I think I told my fellow senators that what's so unusual about an unclassified document being given to the public when, I think it was May the 18th of this year, there was leaked to the New York Times a classified document and even the name of a confidential human source. So we're kind of in a strange situation here. Classified document can be leaked to the New York Times, but a non-classified document can't be made public to 300 million Americans if they're interested in reading it. Now, accordingly, Congress still lacks a full and complete picture with respect to what that document really says. That's why it's important that the document be made public without unnecessary redactions for the American people to see. Can you believe redacting an unclassified document? So now, let me assist for the purposes of more transparency on this subject. The 1023 produced to the House committees redacted reference that the foreign national who allegedly bribed Joe and Hunter Biden allegedly has audio recordings of his conversation with them. 17 such recordings. According to the 1023, the foreign national possesses 15 audio recordings of phone calls between him and Hunter Biden. According to the 1023, the foreign national possesses 2 audio recordings of phone calls between him and then Vice President Joe Biden. These recordings were allegedly kept as a sort of insurance policy for the foreign national in case that he got into a tight spot. The 1023 also indicates that then Vice President Joe Biden may have been involved in bereavement employing Hunter Biden. Based on the facts known to the Congress and the public, it's clear that the Justice Department, the FBI, haven't nearly had the same laser focus on the Biden family. Special Counsel Jack Smith has used a recording against former President Trump. Well, what is U.S. Attorney Weiss doing with respect to these alleged Joe and Hunter Biden recordings that are apparently relevant to the high-stakes bribery scheme? Getting a full and complete 1023 is critical for the American people to know and understand the true nature of the document and to hold the Justice Department and the FBI accountable. It's also important for asserting constitutional congressional oversight powers against an out-of-control executive branch, obviously drunk with political infection. Remember, Congress has received 1023s in the past, and they've been made public. So asking for this 1023 to be turned over to the American people to read is not an unusual thing that goes on with 1023s. Congress owes it to the American people and the brave and heroic whistleblowers to continue to fight for transparency in this matter and make this document public without unnecessary redactions. And I want everybody to remember that I have read the unredacted version, except for a couple or 3 half-inch redactions, I'd say. Thank you very much. I yield the floor.
That is Chuck Grassley, who dropped this bomb yesterday on the floor of the Senate. Ann Hoy Guzman points out a couple of things. She says, strangely, no reporting of Grassley's bomb on the mainstream media. But they did spend a lot of airtime following the Trump motorcade and him climbing stairs to and from the planes. She says this, what's more frightening is that the FBI withheld and then provided a redacted piece of important information, that FBI 1023. That means the FBI is engaged in a cover-up of the material in that 1023. And because of redactions that Chuck Grassley talked about, the small redactions, what that does is that protects the whistleblower's identity. But the redacted version that the House of Representatives got protected the President of the United States for what that 1023 actually had on it. It is an unclassified document. Why isn't it public? It isn't public because clearly the FBI is engaged in a cover-up. We took a president out of office because of a cover-up. How do you take the entire FBI out of office? You see, what started as a really, really good idea among the politicians of yesteryear, I'm not going to get more specific than that. What I am going to tell you is that the idea that there should be some kind of political component to federal law enforcement is disastrous. It's got to be fact. It's got to be follow the evidence where it leads. It has to be apolitical. And we don't have that any longer. Now note, I haven't talked about how President Biden is guilty of this or guilty of that and so on and so forth. We have one piece of paper. And while I say that, there may be others. It depends on who you talk to. James Comer of the House Oversight Committee pointed out that indeed there might be some other 1023s out there. But let's just deal with this one. This 1023 has information that is accusatory from a credible source the FBI has used and paid for years and years. The FBI then saw fit, for whatever reason, to put this into a circumstance whereby they could not let the House of Representatives see what was in it. Specifically, I believe, the fact that there are audio recordings that were made by this foreign national as an insurance policy. I had a 2-word tweet on this particular subject when it broke. Oh my. The ramifications are breathtaking. Breathtaking. Chris Grimes says the FBI and a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney reviewed the allegations against the Biden family when they were first made in 2020. However, law enforcement officials found the claim to be unsubstantiated. You're proving my point. Were they indeed unsubstantiated? Doesn't sound like it to me. Doesn't sound like it to me with the FBI's own paperwork. What about these recordings? Why is it that we are only finding out about these recordings now? Why is that? Well, the reason that we're only finding out about it now is because you can only defy gravity for just so long. Now, this was known during the Obama administration. The Hunter Biden, Joe Biden mess. President Obama looked steely-eyed across the Resolute desk and told Joe Biden to knock it off. But apparently, he did not. Now, that was just something that was said by President Obama. And this was before the 2020 election. This was when President Obama and Joe Biden were president and vice president, respectively. This is not new information. What we have seen in the subsequent years is the management of damaging information. And why they believed that this was going to be something that they could just sweep under the rug and not worry about to the end of time is I can't actually adequately describe the level of professional incompetence that belies. I just can't believe it. I can't believe they would be so dumb. Because when they knew this guy, because the president himself, President Obama, said, hey, you got to knock this stuff off. And then he also had another famous quote about Joe Biden, never underestimate the power of Joe Biden to F things up. Well, here we are. That we have this information, that it is years and years old, means the cover-up is years and years old. And now the FBI is laid bare as the main protagonist in this current cover-up of this information. Why didn't they just provide the same small redactions to protect sources and methods that they provided for Chuck Grassley to the House of Representatives? Chuck Grassley makes a great point because the FBI has contempt for the House of Representatives. They've forgotten what that is. It is a body of people sent to Washington, D.C. by the people of the United States to represent their interests. And they simply do not care. This is indeed terrible. And this is where we find ourselves. And what are we going to do about it? There should be wholesale resignations among the people who made decisions about this in the FBI. The DOJ is turning itself into an enemy of the people and a friend of a particular sect of politics in America. That's the way I see it. How about you? Telephone number 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. This is the Wells Report. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 3 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Telephone number 817-379-2172. It wasn't so long ago when a series of audio tapes brought down a president. Will another series of audio tapes bring down yet another one? The 1023 report that has been in the FBI's possession for years. The information Tony Bobulinski gave them at the outset of Joe Biden's election to the presidency has been sat on for years by that same FBI. The DOJ runs the FBI. They're complicit too. And so the Department of Justice and the FBI are engaged in a cover-up of Biden family conduct. Now, is that conduct criminal? We don't know. But is there probable cause? Absolutely there is. So why hasn't the FBI or the DOJ acted on it? And I'm not talking about some anonymous little investigation by a U.S. attorney in Delaware. I'm talking about the same level of militance when it comes to enforcement of federal law that we've seen with Donald Trump. Well, of course, the answer is the reason we haven't seen that same level of militance is because Joe Biden isn't Donald Trump. He is not of a different political stripe. Joe Biden is one of the club, one of the members, one to be protected at all costs. The costs are getting high. The Department of Justice is, for all intents and purposes, a joke. But it's a terrible, malevolent, degenerate joke of its former self. The FBI has sullied itself maybe beyond recovery. I remember when all this stuff started coming down. And I said it would take 30 years for the FBI to rehabilitate its reputation. I'm not exactly sure that's going to be long enough. And that's if they start today. This is as bad as it gets. It's even worse than the crime of President Biden, or the so-called or the alleged crime of President Biden and his family. It's far worse than that. Because like it or don't, the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation protect this nation, its laws, and its people. And what we see now is we see those two agencies protecting some of the people to the overt damage of political opponents. And they just keep getting it wrong. Christopher Wray runs the FBI. He was going to be held in contempt for not producing this 1023. When he does produce the 1023, it has information missing in it. What for? How dumb do you have to be? A whistleblower steps up to the plate. Here's the document. This is what happens when people start playing politics. Politics supplants reality. This happens over and over and over again. Remember the Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident in Ukraine? Remember that? That was because politics, according to its practitioners, was more important than nuclear physics. The land is still so poisoned, you can't walk around there for any length of time without killing yourself. It's going to be that way for the next 20,000 years. Think about that in the scope of human time. 20,000 years because of a political imperative. Are we headed for a meltdown of that nature? Certainly not nuclear, but certainly among we, the people of the United States. We find ourselves in a position where this country is so divided, that there are people willing to follow in the footsteps of politics before reality, sycophants of the idea, for two reasons. One, they are true believers. They are zealots. Joe Biden is just a victim of just terrible happenstance. And then on the other side, there are people that say, whoa, wait a minute here. We are a nation of laws. But are we? I'm just not going to take that break. We're simply going to keep talking because it's that important. If we find ourselves in a position where there is political law enforcement, there is no law enforcement. We have seen people's lives ruined, canceled, not based on law, but based on overwhelming, scurrilous public relations. Oh my God, he said something about this, about such and so, and blah, 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 blah. He's transphobic, he's this phobic, he's that phobic. And so they're gone. That's not the way this works. Not in this country. We are flushing. We have flushed. They have done it themselves. The Department of Justice right down the toilet. They've taken the FBI with them or vice versa. We've taken the laws they are theoretically supposed to prosecute and enforce and rendered them a laughingstock. But the people that are punished by this political law enforcement, well, they're not laughing. They are suffering. Many of them in prison as we speak. Just exactly where does redress of one's grievances against the government, where did that stop? It certainly didn't stop in the summer of 2020, but it sure as hell stopped January 6th, 2021. This entire affair has brought this nation to the precipice of ruin. And the people that are responsible for it have not learned that the game is over. Sending a redacted 1023 to the House of Representatives. Forgetting about the fact that, there are audio recordings now. Trying to hide the fact that there are audio recordings now. Hunter Biden's laptop sits in an FBI warehouse, languishing. No one cares in the FBI. They're supposed to care, but they don't. Bobulinski shows up and says, hey, there's something bad going on here. They ignore it. A confidential source they've paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to over the years says, yeah, here's what's going on. And oh, by the way, there are recordings of it. They do nothing. And this ignoble vomitus spills out at our feet, courtesy of a senator from Iowa, because the truth will out. But what else? What babies will be thrown out with the bathwater? First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, Sixth Amendment, all the rights God given, not government given. All the while a government tries to usurp God-given rights in favor of political ones. The New York Post reports the story of this Burisma boss and his recordings as follows. The FBI source who reported President Biden's alleged role in a bribery scheme said that a Ukrainian businessman claimed to keep as insurance 15 audio recordings of first son Hunter Biden and 2 of Joe Biden himself, according to Senator Chuck Grassley. He made the staggering claim in a floor speech you just heard after FBI Director Christopher Wray last week allowed House Oversight Committee members to see a redacted informant file about the claim that Hunter and then Vice President Joe Biden received $5 million each to serve the interests of Burisma Holdings owner Mykola Zlochevsky. Congress still lacks a full and complete picture with respect to what that document really says. That's why it's important that the document be made public without necessary redactions for the American public to see. Chuck Grassley said, why is this unclassified document being treated as being classified? Because they can't classify it. They can't classify it as a national top secret because that makes plain the cover-up already made plain, I suppose. But then there's a circumstance whereby we have all of these now missteps that will be exposed by the actual release of the actual document. And the corruption that we've seen in the FBI gets deeper and wider and broader, smellier, more odious with every turn of fate. Let me assist for the purposes of transparency, said Senator Grassley. The 1023 form produced to the House committee redacted references the foreign national who allegedly bribed Joe and Hunter Biden had audio recordings. That's a cover-up. And it cannot go without notice. It cannot go without notice that one of the serious charges against President Trump is obstruction of justice. How high is the crime when the justice enforcers, the justice deliverers, obstruct themselves? How bad is it when those same guardians of the U.S. Code obstruct the Congress? Well, there's a charge for that. It's called obstruction of Congress. How deep do these guys want to go? Everybody talks about Trump in jail, Trump in jail, Trump in jail. What about Comey in jail? What about McCabe in jail? What about Strzok in jail? What about all these other people in jail? How many people want to go to jail over this? Someone said a long time ago that sunlight was the best disinfectant. Put it out there. Every bit of it. And stop playing politics. No, John David. What we want to do is we want to wait until it's closer to the 2024 election, and then we'll dump all this stuff on the people. No, do it right now. The sooner we begin to demand an honest government, the sooner we'll have one. It's going to take decades. It's going to take a complete recalibration of who we, the people, trust to run this nation. Politicians have covered themselves in manure of their own creation. They've put themselves in a position where they are useless to the society that they supposedly are an essential part of. There is no amount of dishonest cleaning that will remove that stain. I doubt that these people will ever remain unstained for the rest of their lives. And that should be a warning for the rest. Don't go down this road. If you want to be a politician, run for office. Don't become an FBI agent and run for office by manipulating the law to your political benefit. It's awful. So this New York Post article goes on. According to the 1023, a foreign national possesses 15 audio recordings of phone calls between he and Hunter Biden, 2 with the President of the United States when he was vice president. The recordings were allegedly kept as an insurance policy by the foreign national in case he got into a tight spot. He's not in a tight spot. Guess who's in a tight spot? So as I've repeatedly asked, says Senator Grassley, so as I've repeatedly asked since going public with the existence of this 1023, what, if anything, has the Justice Department and the FBI done to investigate? They can't investigate it. They cannot investigate it. If they investigate it, they'll find the truth. If they find the truth, that truth will lead to their immediate demise. And therefore, they stand very much like some deer caught in the headlights of a superhighway somewhere, sees the oncoming disaster, and is so busy trying to figure out what to do next, they do nothing. And boom. That's where we find ourselves with these people. They are quite literally paralyzed with fear. And they should be. They should be. Everybody is concerned about what kind of political or, civic unrest there might be regarding President Trump and what appears to most Americans as a blatantly political prosecution, a two-tiered legal system, which is undeniable at this point. Everybody's worried about it. Those people that are trying to keep it from happening call everybody that's engaged in very difficult conversations they themselves will not have because they're afraid of what the product of those conversations will be. They're worried about what these people are going to do. I'll tell you what these people are going to do. They're going to follow in the footsteps of their forebears. They're going to reread the Declaration of Independence. They will take heed of the words inside. They will commit to the God-given rights, not government-given ones. They will redress their grievances. They will clean house. And there are 2 ways for this to happen. The people about to be dismissed can wait for the broom and the eventual scooping into the dustpan, then into the dustbin of history, and be ridiculed and reviled till the end of time. Or they can take their hat in their hands and, as gracefully as possible, leave the American stage. For the sake of the nation, I implore them to do so. At some point, everyone, at least once in their lives, looks in the mirror. And beyond the facade of their eyes, sees the truth in the brain behind them. And they have to make an honest decision, oftentimes to their transitory detriment. or they make a decision to cling to the lies, to cling to the misconduct, to double down on what is plainly absurd, and end their usefulness to society. Because everybody looks at those people and goes, nope. James Comey used to be the director of the FBI. Now he's writing novels. What he should be writing is his resignation from American society. He should take his government pension and withdraw. In that, he should follow the steps of another American, Matt Lauer. Matt Lauer did the exact same thing. I haven't heard from him in years. Good. My only hope with Matt Lauer is that he no longer has electric switches that lock the door behind people that come to his office. That's the ridicule. That's the type of ridicule I'm talking about. These people, when they're asked by CNN to come and say something disgusting about Donald Trump or their political opponents, need to say no. Is it possible for them to do that? The only reason that they wouldn't is because of something made plain. These are lying sociopaths that perhaps even believe what they say, but they are enemies of we, the people of the United States of America. That's the way I see it. Obviously not news. Obviously one American's opinion. What is yours? 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. The chat room is going. Take a look at that when we come back. But make no mistake, the depth of crime that we see is painful and, moreover, just plain damn dangerous. This is the Wells Report. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Thanks very much for joining us today. It's a big day in American history. There will be more historic days in the coming ones. So, when we've talked about where we stand from a standpoint of the rule of law, who is supposed to administer it, who is supposed to enforce it, we also have a political explanation that defies logic, gravity, and indeed just plain good sense. And as has been the case so often, it comes to us from Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre.
The severity of the case that a former president was charged and the sensitivity of the documents. Are you concerned that the intelligence review has not been wrapped up yet? I mean, shouldn't it be expedited? And what can you share with the American public about, whether national security was threatened or not?
So look, I'm not going to, as you've heard from my colleague moments ago, I'm not going to speak directly to the case. What I can say, and also the Admiral spoke to, the national security pieces of this, certainly not going to go beyond what he stated here at the podium. What I can say, and you've heard us say this over and over again, this is a president that respects the rule of law. This is the president that wants to make sure and has proven that to be in his actions, to make sure that the Department of Justice is truly independent. And, and he said that during the campaign, he's restoring certainly the integrity of the Department of Justice. And that is something that's important to this president. And I'm going to just leave it there. I'm just not going to speak to the case at all or comment on the case. And so I will refer you to the Department of Justice on anything specific, or ODNI on the national security aspect of this. Okay.
That's horrendous. It's absolutely horrendous. And oh, by the way, people have said it was horrendous. Conservatives across Twitter scoffed at White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre's defense of President Biden's respect for the rule of law. What can I say? You've heard this over and over again. You just heard it for yourself. If you believe the DOJ is independent, you are a moron, said Center for Renewing American Digital Media manager Kingsley Cortez. The DOJ, that the President of the United States is working to restore the credibility of the DOJ, is a joke. It's like having the world's most heinous bank robber being described as someone who is trying to restore faith in the American banking system. It's absolutely plainly stupid. I mean, this is another thing that's really scary here. These people are saying this with a straight face. Maybe they actually believe it. It's scary how clueless and what a liar she is. This, according to Hot Air contributing editor Karen Townsend. Is this a joke? Dear America host Graham Allen asked. And it goes on and on and on. The Republican National Lawyers Association tagged the House Judiciary Select Committee on the weaponization of the federal government and wrote, quote, the Biden administration has shown again and again it will use the DOJ and other agencies to go after what it considers to be its political enemies. Things are so bad, an entire congressional committee had to be created on the subject. There's no such thing as an independent federal agency when it literally corresponds to the executive branch. This according to Univision political analyst Bianca Rodriguez. And who is the top authority within the executive branch? the president. Earlier at the same press conference, White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby declared similarly, and by the way, that was the admiral that Karine Jean-Pierre was referring to, the president respects the rule of law and the democratic institutions of the United States of America and takes very seriously his role as president of the United States in advancing that. Look at what these people are doing. Look what these people are doing. Damaging themselves, perhaps beyond repair. Speaking anything but truth. This is absurdism. And that's either because they don't know what else to do or they're just sociopaths. Sentinel CEO Charles Marino appeared to express mock shock at Kirby's claim that Biden respects the rule of law. Wow, that's news. It's not news. It's a lie. Is it not? If it's not a lie, what exactly is it? Everybody is looking at President Trump and saying, my God, we're going to throw a president in jail. Thank God. Everybody's looking at Joe Biden. Good heavens to Betsy. This guy's getting paid millions and millions of dollars. Is he selling out the country? The big threat is neither of those. The big threat is the national law enforcement is trying to railroad one and protect the other. The executive producer of the Wells Report is Dirk Steele. My name is John David Wells. You can reach us at thewellsreport@frontier.com. Please do so if you feel like it. Thanks for joining us for this edition of the Wells Report. Wow. What a day. What a day. All right, my friends, I've got a lot of work to do. What's really weird because, since I have more time on my hands these days, I have more to do. It's the craziest thing. God bless all y'all. Thanks very much.